Welcome back. You are tuned in to Traders Nation. I'm pleased to have back with us once again Peter Schiff. He's book author of Crash Proof, How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse. Peter, welcome back to Traders Nation. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. Now, Peter, listen, Crash Proof, you predicted it, the housing bubble, you predicted the record number of foreclosures, then ultimately a recession, potential recession, and you did this all back when everybody was buying houses at the peak. No, there was no talk about this, Peter.
Sure, 60 Minutes just ran a pretty good segment. Of course, they could have run the same segment 3 years ago if they were listening to me. They didn't have to wait for the disaster to unfold. It was obvious to me when it was still going up how it was going to end.
Right. I mean, it was a story to you, but apparently nobody wanted to talk about it back then. Or did they?
No, when everybody is making money. It was very similar when I was criticizing the NASDAQ bubble in the late 90s. No one wanted to hear about it. Of course, after the bubble burst, it was obvious that it was a problem.
Yeah.
And now you're having the same thing with real estate, but on a bigger picture.
Yeah.
My book is called Crash Proof: How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse,
Sure.
not the coming housing collapse.
Right.
The housing collapse is just part of a bigger picture.
Yeah.
Our whole economy is just as viable as an internet stock or a subprime mortgage.
Right.
It's just like I could see that the housing market was a bubble.
Yeah.
And the NASDAQ, I can see that our entire economy is also in a bubble because what we've done as a nation is we've simply consumed. We've borrowed trillions of dollars from the rest of the world, and we've blown it on consumption.
Right.
All the while, the real fundamentals of our economy, the infrastructure, the manufacturing sector has been gutted, and what's left is basically a bankrupted nation. I mean, we owe trillions and trillions of dollars to the Saudis, to the Chinese, to the Europeans, and we can't pay it back. And we borrowed the money not to build factories, but to buy plasma TVs and granite countertops and SUVs. We're broke, and this whole economy is going to have to collapse because the world isn't going to lend us any more money.
Peter, so much for sovereignty. I mean, literally, the world owns us.
Well, I mean, the only thing we could do, of course, is create so much inflation that we don't pay them back in anything real. And we're probably going to do that. But the reality is, though, then we're going to have to fend for ourselves. I mean, we have dramatically diminished our industrial capacity, so we're no longer the nation we used to be. I mean, we're not going to be this wealthy country because we simply don't have the productive capacity anymore. We don't have the savings. We squandered it all on reckless consumption. And, of course, our economists and Wall Street and the government applauded us every step of the way. They kept pointing to the GDP and saying, hey, we're doing great. And they ignored the other side of the balance sheet, all the money that we were borrowing in order to finance that consumption.
Let's talk about the dollar. It's been trampled on, really. Can it get any worse?
Oh, it's going to get a lot worse. The dollar is, not at record lows yet, but we've broken down. Gold's up another $15 today. It's over $920 an ounce. It's going to go ballistic here. Prices are going through the roof, and the dollar is going to fall like a stone.
Yeah.
Once we hit through some more key levels, the dollar is just going to collapse. I mean, in my book, Crash Proof, I predicted that the dollar would break through the key 80 level on the dollar index, which we did some months ago.
Yeah.
The dollar index is right now around 76, and my forecast was that over the next 2 to 3 years, from the point that it broke that number, the dollar index would trade down to 40, which literally halves the value of the dollar, which means other currencies will double relative to the dollar.
All right, so maybe we should be looking toward trading currencies, unfortunately, against the U.S. dollar.
Well, what people need to do, and the whole point of view, the second part of my book, it explains how Americans can preserve their wealth by divesting themselves of dollars now before the dollar loses the lion's share of its value. So people need to look around the world for salvation. They need to take their dollars and convert them into foreign assets. We buy foreign stocks, foreign bonds, foreign currencies, precious metals, commodities, all sorts of assets that will retain their value when the dollar loses its value.
Yeah, all right. When the decline of foreign central banks' treasury bond purchases dry up, what happens? Interest rates go through the roof?
What happens to the housing market when people don't want to lend money to subprime borrowers?
Yeah.
The housing prices collapse. We're a nation of subprime borrowers. We've screwed the whole world. And when the world stops lending us money, which they're in the process of doing, it's not just the housing market that implodes, but our whole economy, because it's all based on borrowing money from foreigners to consume imported products.
All right.
And when they don't want to lend us the money and ship us the products, it's all over.
The game's up. It's done. It's over.
Yeah, and we're going to have to go through a gut-wrenching recession. We're going to have to return to a viable economy, and it's not going to be fun. No more so than a heroin addict going through withdrawal in order to get healthy. You know, the withdrawal is not, a pleasant experience. At least that's what they tell me.
Right.
You know, so this recession is going to be the equivalent of economic withdrawal. We've been high on cheap money and easy credit,
right,
and we've got to return to a healthy economy that produces and saves. And that is not going to happen without some pain. There's going to be real estate prices are going to fall, stock prices are going to fall, people are going to lose their jobs.
Right.
This is going to happen, but we're going to have to suck it up.
Peter, what kind of time frame are we looking at? 3 to 5 years? 5 to 10?
Well, it's happening right now. The whole thing is unraveling, and the government is trying to delay the process. And with these ill-conceived stimulus packages, I have no doubt that this is not going to be the last stimulus package. They're going to be, creating these phony packages for years, and they're going to drag this thing out. And this country is going to be mired in recession for years.
Right. All right. U.S. debt with a monetization of U.S. debt will lead to greater inflation.
Well, yeah, we already have. I mean, we already have inflation right now as bad as anything we had in the 1970s, and it's about to get a lot worse. And, the only reason that nobody understands that the inflation is so bad is because the government lies about it now. Back in the 1970s, the CPI was far more honest than it is today. The government redesigned the CPI in the 90s to hide inflation. So now the government doesn't pick up all the price increases that inflation causes.
Right. They've been cooking the books. I mean, let's face it, when they come out with a figure, and then all of a sudden 2 weeks later it just didn't have the reaction they wanted. Well, we got revised figures now. How's that?
These inflation figures are about as real as Enron's earnings were. It's the same gimmicks and sleight of hand accounting. But the average American out there, they don't live in the world of government statistics. They live in the world of reality.
Yeah.
And they can see what's happening to what they're paying for groceries, what they're paying for gasoline, what they're paying for health insurance, what they're paying for education. People can see their bills going up. So, more and more people aren't buying into this nonsense about inflation being 2 or 3%. It's obviously not.
Yeah, Peter, I want to focus on pensions and pension plans, if you will. They have limited protection. How can retirees, or those even putting away right now, the young crowd out there put away for retirement, how can they protect themselves from economic jeopardy?
They've got to realize that the biggest casualty in this whole thing is going to be the value of the dollar. So if you're planning on retiring on a portfolio of dollars, forget about it. You're not going to retire. So if you want to preserve your retirement, you got to preserve your purchasing power before it's too late. And if people read Crash Proof, how to profit from the coming economic collapse, they've got 3 chapters at the end of the book that deal with how to protect your own retirement, how to preserve your wealth. During the 1970s, the dollar lost 70% of its value. Currencies like the Swiss franc and the Deutschmark and the yen tripled. Gold went up 24 times. Silver went up 50-fold. Gasoline went up 10-fold. A lot of people who were planning on retiring in 1970 or 1980, based on a portfolio, by the time, those years rolled around, they might have not have been able to retire because prices went up so much.
How scary is that? Deja vu of the Jimmy Carter era. Okay, I mean,
this is going to be it all over again, only on steroids.
All right, on steroids. After it's all said and done, Peter, is there a bright spot that we should be looking out for?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I hope in the rubble of what's about to come, we can rebuild a viable economy. I mean, I'm hopeful. I mean, that's why I'm working with the Ron Paul campaign. I mean, he's, Ron Paul, for president. Sure. I mean, you got to support the guy. He's the only one that understands these economic problems, and he's the only one out there that can help dismantle the federal government, which is what we need. If we're going to dig our way out of this hole, we got to get the government feet off our shovels. We eliminate the income tax. We got to deregulate. We got to substantially cut back on government spending, particularly government spending all around the world. We can't afford to be an empire when we don't have any money. So we've got to seriously cut government spending so that we can free up resources here at home to rebuild this economy. I mean, that's what we got to do. We got to roll up our sleeves and start working.
Peter, we're out of time, but I don't know how we're going to cut government spending when there's so much pork barrel, there's so much social welfare.
We're going to have to do it. There's no 2 ways about it. The money's not there anymore, and if they keep printing it, it's just going to create more inflation, and it's going to compound our problems.
The problem here, Peter, is that you have the have-nots are outweighing the haves. Okay, and the spending on the government.
Look, the government. We're a nation of debtors right now, and the government is trying to bail out debtors with inflation. But ultimately, it's not going to do the debtor any good if he can't afford to eat or he can't afford to heat his home because we've destroyed our currency.
That's right. All right, Peter, where can we find the book at? Barnes & Noble?
Well, you can get Crash Proof at any major bookstore, on Amazon. Go to my own website, Europac.net, EUROPAC.net. A lot of great information about my company, the things I've been writing and saying for years, and you can order the book there as well.
All right, head on over to Peter's site today, or your local bookstore too, or I should say, your local bookstore, Amazon, the corner bookstore. All these guys support the small mom and pop shop to the big online store. Get a book either way. Crash Proof: How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse. Peter Schiff with us here today. Thanks for your time.